My friends, there's a real scenario forming in Pittsburgh right now that not enough people are fully talking about, and it revolves around how quickly this roster could start changing after the 2026 NFL Draft. When you take a closer look at the current depth chart of the Pittsburgh Steelers, it becomes clear that some familiar names are not as safe as many fans might think heading into the season. Start with the quarterback room, because that's where the tension is building the most. The expectation around the league is that Aaron Rodgers is likely to end up in Pittsburgh, and if that happens, everything shifts immediately. You're suddenly looking at a situation where the Steelers, who typically carry 3 quarterbacks, could be forced into a very uncomfortable decision. Drew Aller, coming in as a 3rd-round pick, is widely viewed as someone the organization wants to develop and keep. That alone puts pressure on both Mason Rudolph and Will Howard. Now here's where it gets interesting. Mason Rudolph might actually be the most vulnerable name in that room, not because he's incapable, but because he doesn't offer long-term upside. If Will Howard shows even comparable ability during training camp and preseason, the edge goes to the younger player every single time. Teams don't just think about week 1, they think about the next 3 to 5 years. That's where Rudolph starts to lose ground. There's even a realistic possibility the Steelers explore trade options for him, even if the return is something minimal like a conditional late-round pick. And if that market doesn't develop, the team could be forced into a tough call. Risk losing Howard by trying to stash him on the practice squad, or move on from Rudolph entirely. And that's just the beginning. The running back room is another area quietly getting crowded. Jaylen Warren and Rico Dowdle headline the group, and then you factor in additional depth pieces and hybrid roles like Riley Nowakowski. Suddenly a player like Caleb Johnson, who many fans might assume is safe, starts to look like someone fighting for his spot. The numbers just don't add up easily. Carrying that many backs isn't always practical, especially when special teams roles and positional flexibility come into play. Johnson still has value, especially because of his age and potential, which means if the Steelers decide to move on, a trade could be the preferred route rather than simply cutting him. Then there's Roman Wilson, and this might be one of the most fascinating storylines on the entire roster. His first 2 seasons didn't go the way anyone hoped, and it got to the point where the team felt the need to bring in veteran receivers to stabilize the position. But here's the key detail. He may have been used incorrectly. Wilson thrived as a slot receiver in college, yet spent much of his early NFL time playing outside. That mismatch matters more than people realize. Now, if the coaching staff finally puts him in his natural role, there's a real chance he becomes a useful piece in this offense. But if he doesn't show clear improvement this year, the door opens for him to be moved or even cut, especially with new depth emerging in the receiver room. You can also feel the pressure building in other areas of the roster, particularly with players dealing with injuries or inconsistent development. Corey Trice Jr., for example, is running out of time. Talent has never been the issue, it's availability. After multiple injuries, this season shapes up as his last real opportunity to prove he can stay on the field and contribute. In a secondary that's getting deeper, the margin for error is basically gone. And even some of the newer names coming out of the draft aren't completely safe. Late round picks and developmental prospects always face an uphill battle, especially if they struggle in camp or fail to stand out. Players like Gabriel Rubio and Robert Spears Jennings could find themselves in danger if others outperform them early. That's the reality of the NFL. Draft status might get you in the door, but it doesn't guarantee you stay. What stands out in all of this is that the Steelers aren't just building a roster, they're creating competition at nearly every level. That's usually a good thing, but it also means tough decisions are coming. Familiar faces could disappear faster than expected, and some of these moves might catch fans completely off guard. So now the question becomes unavoidable. Which of these names do you actually believe is most at risk of not being on this roster by week 1? And are the Steelers making the right call if they move on from them? And when you carry that question forward, it forces you to look even deeper into how this roster is being constructed, because this isn't just about trimming down numbers. It's about redefining roles and deciding what kind of team the Pittsburgh Steelers want to be in 2026. Take the offensive line situation as a perfect example. There's a name flying a bit under the radar right now, but internally it's a much bigger conversation than people realize. Broderick Jones. On paper, this is a player with clear talent and starting potential, but availability is everything in this league, and his injury situation, especially something as serious and unpredictable as a neck issue, changes the equation completely. If he's not fully healthy by training camp or shows any limitations, the Steelers suddenly have options they didn't have have before. They've added depth, they've invested in the position again, and they're no longer in a position where they have to wait on anyone. That's the shift. This front office is building layers, and when you build layers, you create insurance, and sometimes that insurance replaces you, and that same philosophy shows up across the roster. You're seeing it in the secondary, where competition is quietly becoming one of the most intense battles on the team. Corey Trice Jr. is the clearest example, because at this point, it's not even just about performance. It's about trust. Can the coaching staff rely on him week after week? Can he stay healthy long enough to develop? Because if the answer is no, the Steelers won't hesitate. This is his final year under his rookie deal, and the NFL doesn't wait around for potential forever. There are always younger, healthier options coming in behind you. Then shift your focus back to the younger additions, especially the rookies trying to carve out a role. This is where things get even more unpredictable. A player like Gabriel Rubio comes in with questions already attached. Injury history, testing numbers, consistency. That means he doesn't have the luxury of a slow start. If he struggles early in camp, if an undrafted player or another depth piece flashes more, the coaching staff could make a quick decision. And we've seen this before in Pittsburgh. They are not afraid to stash players on the practice squad if they think development is needed, even if it means exposing them to waivers. Robert Spears Jennings might be an even more extreme case. The physical tools are there, the speed is there, the aggression is there, but the tape raises concerns, especially in coverage. And at the NFL level, that's not something you can hide. If those issues show up again in training camp, it becomes very difficult to justify a roster spot, especially on a team that's clearly prioritizing versatility and reliability in the defensive backfield. He could very easily become one of those players the Steelers try to develop quietly off the main roster, hoping he improves without costing them a valuable spot. What ties all of this together is a very clear pattern. Nothing is guaranteed. Not for veterans, not for young players, not even for recent draft picks. The Steelers are building competition across every position group, and that competition is going to force decisions that might not sit well with everyone watching from the outside. But from an organizational standpoint, it's a sign of structure. It's a sign that they're no longer holding on to players out of comfort. They're evaluating strictly based on fit, upside, and availability. And if you step back for a second, you can see what this really means for the 2026 season. This isn't just about who makes the team. It's about how aggressive the Steelers are willing to be in shaping their identity. Are they going all in on youth and long-term development? Are they prioritizing immediate impact with veterans like a potential Aaron Rodgers addition? Or are they trying to balance both and risking tough losses in the process? Because one thing is certain, between the quarterback situation, the crowded skill positions, the injury concerns, and the influx of new talent, this roster is heading toward one of the most competitive training camps in recent years. And when that happens, surprises aren't just possible, they're inevitable. So as all of this unfolds, pay close attention to the names we talked about, because at least one or maybe several won't make it to week 1. And when that happens, it's going to tell us exactly how serious this team is about its direction moving forward. And the deeper you go into this situation, the more you realize that what's happening right now isn't just a normal roster adjustment period. It's a quiet turning point for the Pittsburgh Steelers as an organization. Because when teams reach this stage where multiple positions are overloaded with competition, it usually signals one thing: the margin for error is gone. Coaches are no longer projecting what a player might become. They're reacting to what he is right now. And that shift tends to expose players who were previously protected by potential, draft status, or familiarity within the system. Look again at the quarterback situation, because even beyond the obvious names, it reflects a bigger philosophy change. If Aaron Rodgers does arrive, this team instantly moves into a win-now mindset. That changes how every position is evaluated. Suddenly, development projects become less valuable than reliability. Experience starts to outweigh upside. And that ripple effect could influence decisions far beyond just Mason Rudolph or Will Howard. It could impact how quickly the team moves on from younger players at other positions who aren't contributing immediately. Now connect that to the wide receiver room. Roman Wilson isn't just fighting for a role, he's fighting against a timeline. In a rebuilding scenario, he might get more time to figure things out, but in a competitive, possibly playoff-focused team, every rep matters. If he produces, he stays and becomes part of the rotation. If he hesitates or disappears in key moments, the coaching staff won't wait. And with new additions and emerging depth behind him, that leash is shorter than ever. The same pressure applies across the board. At running back, it's not just about talent, it's about versatility. Can you contribute on special teams? Can you fill multiple roles? Can you justify your roster spot over someone who offers more flexibility? That's where someone like Caleb Johnson could get squeezed out, not necessarily because he's not good enough, but because someone else fits the overall structure better. And this is where fans sometimes get caught off guard. The decisions won't always feel intuitive. A player you like, a player who's shown flashes, might be the one who gets moved. Not because he failed, but because someone else made the roster make more sense. Even on the defensive side, where depth has traditionally been a strength, the same rules apply. Corey Trice Jr. doesn't just need to be healthy, he needs to prove he can be counted on consistently. Availability, again, becomes the deciding factor, and with younger players pushing for opportunities, the Steelers won't hesitate to make a switch if they feel it strengthens the unit overall. And when you zoom out, all of this builds toward one unavoidable conclusion. This training camp is going to define more than just the final 53-man roster. It's going to define the identity of the team, who they trust, who they're willing to invest in, and who they're ready to move on from, even if it's earlier than expected. Because once those decisions are made, there's no turning back. The direction is set, the tone is established, and every move from that point forward builds on what happens in this exact moment. So now it really comes down to how aggressive this front office and coaching staff are willing to be. Do they stick with familiarity and give certain players one more chance? Or do they fully embrace the competition they've created and make the tough calls, no matter how surprising they might be? And once that answer starts to reveal itself, you'll notice it not through headlines first, but through subtle decisions that shape the final roster of the Pittsburgh Steelers. It shows up in snap distribution during preseason games. It shows up in who gets reps with the first team in practice. It shows up in which players are being tested in multiple roles, and which ones are quietly being phased out. Those details matter because they tell you exactly how the coaching staff is thinking before any official move is made. And here's the reality that a lot of fans don't always want to accept. Some of these decisions are already leaning in a certain direction internally. Training camp doesn't create every outcome. It often confirms what the staff has been seeing for months. That means players like Mason Rudolph, Caleb Johnson, or even Roman Wilson aren't just competing in August, they're carrying evaluations that started long before that. Now think about how that impacts the locker room. Competition is healthy, but it also creates urgency. Every missed assignment, every dropped pass, every hesitation, it all gets magnified when the depth chart is this tight. Younger players feel it because they're trying to prove they belong. Veterans feel it because they know their experience alone won't save them anymore. And that's where this becomes something bigger than just roster cuts. This is about accountability. The Steelers are building an environment where performance dictates opportunity, and that's a shift that can redefine a team's culture if it's applied consistently. You can already see hints of that in how certain position groups are being stacked. At wide receiver, there's no longer room for someone to figure it out eventually. At running back, you need to justify your role beyond just carrying the ball. On defense, especially in the secondary, availability is just as important as ability, and all of this circles back to one central idea. The Steelers are trying to eliminate uncertainty.